Margaret Hartwell had never imagined that a single paper crane would change her life forever. Standing in the sterile hallway of Hartwell Industries at 11:47 p.m., clutching a termination letter in her trembling hands, she watched 30 years of faithful service crumble like the delicate origami figures scattered across the conference room table behind her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her weathered face as tears she'd been holding back finally broke free. At 62, starting over seemed impossible. But what hurt most wasn't losing her job, it was knowing she'd failed the one person who needed her most. "Mom, you need to turn in your keys," the security guard said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Even he seemed uncomfortable with what had just transpired. Margaret nodded, fumbling with the keychain she'd carried for 3 decades. Each key represented a door she'd unlocked before dawn, an office she'd cleaned with meticulous care, a space she'd made welcoming for people who barely noticed she existed. Until tonight, when CEO Jonathan Pierce discovered her unprofessional conductor folding paper cranes during her break. 3 hours earlier, Margaret had been in the 20th floor conference room, carefully creasing a piece of discarded printer paper into a perfect crane. It was 8:30 p.m., well into her shift, and she'd already cleaned the executive offices, emptied every trash can, and mopped the marble floors until they gleamed. She always took her 15-minute break in that room because the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city lights, a brief moment of beauty in her long nights of invisible labor. The origami was an idle hobby. Each crane she folded carried a wish, a prayer for her 8-year-old grandson, Danny, who hadn't spoken a word since his parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. The doctors called it selective mutism, trauma-induced. Margaret called it heartbreak that ran too deep for words. She'd become his guardian, his anchor in a world that had suddenly gone silent. 1,000 cranes, she whispered to herself that night, just as she had every night for months. According to Japanese legend, folding 1,000 paper cranes would grant a wish. Margaret's wish was simple: to hear Danny's voice again. She was so absorbed in her careful folding that she didn't hear the elevator ding or the footsteps approaching. When the conference room lights blazed on, Margaret looked up to see Jonathan Pierce standing in the doorway, his face a mask of cold disapproval. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice cut through the silence like broken glass. Margaret's hands stilled, the half-formed crane crushed between her fingers. "I was just You're being paid to clean, not to play with paper dolls." Pierce stepped into the room, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor. "Do you have any idea what this conference table costs? What these papers might contain?" "Sir, I only use discarded paper. I would never." "Enough." Pierce held up a hand, his wedding ring catching the light. Margaret noticed, with the eye of someone who'd cleaned countless offices, that he'd removed his wedding photos from his desk months ago. "This is a Fortune 500 company, not a daycare center. We have standards." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Pierce, I've worked here for 30 years. My record is spotless. I've never 30 years of enabling this kind of unprofessional behavior, apparently." Pierce walked to the table where dozens of Margaret's paper cranes sat in neat rows, her collection growing slowly toward the magical 1,000. With one swift motion, he swept them into the trash can. "You're terminated." Effective immediately, the cranes fell like broken promises, their wings crumpled, their wishes silenced. Now, 3 hours later, Margaret stood in her small apartment, staring at the acceptance letter for Danny's specialized therapy program, the one she could no longer afford. The program that might have helped him find his voice again. She sank into her threadbare armchair, overwhelmed by the weight of failure. Danny appeared in the doorway, his dark eyes wide with concern. At 8, He possessed an intuitive understanding of emotion that adults often lack. He could read Margaret's despair in the slump of her shoulders, in the resignation written across her face. He padded silently across the room and climbed into her lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. Margaret closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo, trying to memorize this moment of connection. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. "Grandma messed up. I don't know how we're going to." Danny pulled back suddenly, his eyes bright with urgency. His small hands moved to her face, cupping her cheeks as if he could transfer his thoughts through touch alone. His mouth opened, then closed, frustration flickering across his features. Then, so quietly Margaret almost missed it, came a single word: Eli. Margaret's breath caught. "What did you say, baby?" Danny's voice, unused for 2 years, came out as barely more than a whisper. "Eli, the man who folds birds like you." Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. Danny hadn't spoken since the accident, hadn't responded to months of therapy. "Who is Eli, sweetheart?" Danny slipped from her lap and ran to his bedroom, returning with his backpack. From inside, he pulled out a paper crane, not one of Margaret's simple white ones, but an elaborate creation folded from what looked like expensive letterhead paper. The folds were precise, masterful, and along one wing, someone had written in elegant script, "For courage." Margaret turned the crane over in her hands, her eyes widening as she recognized the Hartwell Industries logo watermarked in the paper. "Where did you get this, Danny?" "The nice man in the big office," Danny said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "When you clean at night, sometimes he stays late too. He saw me waiting in the lobby and showed me how to make the special birds. He said his daddy taught him when he was sad." Margaret's mind raced. The big Messiah Pierce's office. But that was impossible. Pierce had just fired her for the very thing Danny was describing. "Danny, what did this man look like?" "Tall, sad eyes like mine used to be. He has a picture of a little girl on his desk that he hides when other people come." Danny's words tumbled out now, as if a dam had broken. "He told me the birds carry wishes to heaven. He makes them for his little girl who went away." Margaret's hands trembled as understanding dawned. The removed family photos, the late nights at the office. Pierce wasn't just a heartless shah, he was a father drowning in his own grief. The next morning, Margaret stood once again in the Hartwell Industries lobby. But this time she wasn't wearing her janitor's uniform. She dressed in her best outfit, to a navy dress she'd worn to Danny's parents' funeral, and carried a small gift bag in her hands. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt endless. When she knocked on Pierce's office door, her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Come in," came the familiar voice, though it sounded different in daylight attired. Hollow. Pierce looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "Mrs. Hartwell, what are you doing here?" "I thought security escorted you out last night." "They did, sir." "I'm here about something else." Margaret stepped forward, placing the gift bag on his desk. "My grandson wanted me to return this." Pierce opened the bag slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he pulled out a perfect paper crane, one of his own. Margaret realized now. But this one was different. Danny had somehow transformed it, adding layers of smaller folds, creating something that looked less like a bird and more like two figures embracing. "I don't understand," Pierce said quietly. "My grandson hasn't spoken in 2 years, Mr. Pierce." "Not since his parents died." "But last night, after you fired me, he said his first word in 24 months. He said Eli." Pierce's face went pale. "How did he?" "He told me about the nice man who stays late in the big office, the one who taught him to fold birds for wishes, the one who makes cranes for his little girl who went away." Margaret's voice was gentle, understanding. "He broke his silence to tell me about your kindness." Pierce's composure cracked. His hands shook as he set the crane down on his desk, next to a hidden photo of a little girl with his eyes and her mother's smile. "Elizabeth," he whispered. "Her name was Elizabeth. We called her Eli. Danny told me you taught him that origami birds carry wishes to heaven. She died 3 years ago. Leukemia." Pierce's voice broke completely. "I started folding them after the funeral. It was the only thing that helped with the pain. When I saw your grandson in the lobby those nights, so quiet, so sad, he reminded me of myself." Margaret felt her own eyes filling. "You weren't angry about the origami last night. You were protecting something precious." "I panicked. When I saw you folding cranes, it felt like my private grief was being exposed. I thought you'd somehow found out about Eli, about my weakness." Pierce looked up at her, shame written across his features. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hartwell. You didn't deserve that. We're both just parents trying to heal broken children, Mr. Pierce. Sometimes we make mistakes when we're scared." Pierce stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "I don't know how to fix this. Your job, the therapy program Danny needs I looked into your situation after last night. I know about the acceptance letter. I'm not here for my job back, sir. I'm here because a little boy who hasn't spoken in 2 years found his voice talking about your kindness. That's worth more than any paycheck, but it's not enough, is it?" Pierce turned back to her. "Danny needs that program." Margaret smiled sadly. "We'll find another way. We always do." Pierce was quiet for a long moment, staring at the transformed crane Danny had created. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, more certain than Margaret had ever heard it. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'd like to make you an offer. Not your old job back, as something better." Hartwell Industries has been talking about creating a family support program for employees dealing with trauma and loss. We need someone to run it, someone who understands what it means to hold a family together when everything falls apart. Margaret's breath caught. "Sir, yeah, the position comes with a substantial salary increase and full benefits, including coverage for Danny's therapy program. But more than that, it comes with the freedom to fold as many cranes as you want, whenever you want. In fact, I'd like to make it part of the program. Art therapy, they call it." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. "Mr. Pierce, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me build something good from our shared grief. Say you'll help me create a place where broken families can find healing." That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with Danny, teaching him to fold a new type of crane, one Pierce had shown them, with wings that seemed to embrace rather than fly. Outside, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and inside, the sound of Danny's laughter filled spaces that had been silent too long. "Tell me again about Eli," Margaret said, watching Danny's small fingers work the paper with increasing confidence. "She was his little girl," Danny said, his voice clear and strong. "And now we make birds for her too, so she knows she's not forgotten." Margaret nodded, understanding flooding through her like warmth. Sometimes the most profound connections happen in silence, between souls who recognize their shared wounds. Sometimes healing begins with the simple act of folding paper into hope, one crane at a time. On Pierce's desk the next morning sat 2 cranes, one Margaret had folded for Danny's voice, and one Danny had folded for Eli's memory. They sat side by side, paper wings touching, carrying wishes between heaven and earth, reminding everyone who saw them that kindness, once given, multiplies beyond measure. In the end, Margaret learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. And sometimes, in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and hope, a child's whispered word can change not just one life, but an entire legacy of love.